Radio Darwin. How much did you pay for the first place you rented in the top end? Mine was $170 a week over the road from Parap Shops in July 2002. I rented around Darwin for years. Share houses, moved several times. For a while there, it was at least once a year, almost always, when the landlord sold the property and kicked us out. That was all before 2010. I met a couple at the Decky on Monday this week who've been here for 4 years. Their landlord is selling the property they've been really happy with, and they've had enough of being shuffled around and are buying a place. They're 80, and they can afford to buy a house they like where they want. What's your story? Did you rent for a bit or buy straight away? How much did you pay for rent when you got here? And if you're still renting, what are you paying now? 1300 057 222 is the number to call. Text in on 0487 991057. A better deal for renters. National Cabinet met in August 2023 and pushed states and territories to do just that. More secure and affordable housing for Australians. The territory has more renters per head than any other jurisdiction. So 2 years on, how are we going? Annie Taylor is CEO of NT Shelter. Annie, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Annie, very helpfully, the report card is colour-coded. Blue is for adopting a reform that exceeds the better deal for renters. Green is following the reform. Yellow, considerable progress. Orange is started to make progress, but substantial efforts are still needed. And red is no progress. So, in short, blue and green are good. Orange and red are bad, kind of like bushfires. The NT is mostly red. Other jurisdictions are mostly green. What are we missing here?
Yeah, look, you're exactly right. The Northern Territory is doing really poorly when it comes to the national picture. We're bottom of the pack, which is really unfortunate. And it's more unfortunate when we think about the fact that almost 50% of the Northern Territory population are renting, which is more than any other jurisdiction. So it's particularly important here in the NT that we're protecting that almost 50% of the population who are renting. We have had some positive rental reform over the last couple of years in the NT, but we're still missing some really key areas that we need to look at, like no grounds evictions and limiting the amount of rental increases that we can have per year. So currently we're the only jurisdiction in Australia that allows rent increases every 6 months, which is really hard out there when we're already, as you've already said, one of the most expensive places in the country in which to rent a house.
And that big change, a national standard of no more than one rental increase a year, that's new in a lot of places, isn't it? They didn't have that before. It was rental increases every 6 months, say. But they've changed absolutely. And we haven't. Is there any sign that that is going to change in the NT?
Look, it's not something that we're seeing yet. It's a really good question. And other jurisdictions have recognised that limiting rental increases to once a year brings stability, both for the renters and for the landlords and for the rental market itself. It gives people the ability to plan and to budget and to stay in their homes longer. And so, if we're seeing here that it can still be increased every 6 months, it's really out of step with the rest of the country, and it's hitting families hard during what is a cost of living crisis. We've run some surveys of renters in the past, and so has the Darwin Community Legal Service more recently. And we know that it's incredibly tough for people who are renting, and we know that people are leaving the Northern Territory because it's so expensive to rent. It's expensive and it's hard to access the rental market.
We'll get to that in a little more detail, but what about regulation of short-stay rental accommodation? Progress has been slow in other jurisdictions. It's not happening here. How much of an issue is it in the top end and Darwin in particular?
Look, we don't have as much of an Airbnb saturation issue here in the Northern Territory as there is interstate. As far as we can tell, it's not fueling the rental crisis as much as it is elsewhere, in cities like Hobart, Perth, Sydney, where you've got that real tourism saturation. However, we have a different sort of problem here, and that's a supply crisis. We just don't have enough social and affordable accommodation for people who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness. And we know that sometimes in the homelessness sector, we'll need to accommodate people in hotels because there's no specific supported accommodation that's available to them. And of course, accommodating people in hotels is more viable during the wet season when it's cheaper and hotels aren't as busy. But during the tourist season, it becomes really hard. So there's this bigger systemic issue with a lack of affordable accommodation options, and that's from short-term through to long-term. So to really address that, we need to build more rental accommodation, which includes social and affordable accommodation of all lengths.
Now, we have one blue, and that's a ban on soliciting rent bidding, so just a bidding above what it's been advertised at. That was introduced in 2024 in the NT. How effectively is it being enforced?
Look, that's really hard to know. I'm a renter myself here in Darwin and have been renting for the last year here, and it's from my own personal experience, it's certainly not something that I'm seeing. So that's really positive. But some of those things are really hard to enforce, aren't they? So it's all we can do to regulate it. But at the end of the day, it's what we're hearing from renters on the ground that is really important, and that's why it's really important, I think, that we have support for renters out there. And DCLS, I think it's really important to mention, that's the Darwin Community Legal Service, do have a tenants advice service. So if people are out there and they're hearing that there is rent bidding going on when they're trying to find a rental, they can call the tenants advice service, or if they need advocacy or just general advice about renting in the Northern Territory, they can call this advice service to get some more information, and people can Google that number, or I'm happy to provide it. And it's just a great resource for renters in the Northern Territory.
Have you got that number on you right now?
I do. So that's 8982 and it's 1111.
8982 1111. That's pretty easy to remember. 8982 then 1111. Okay, Darwin's housing rents are high, among the highest in the country. Our apartment rents are at the high end of the middle of the pack, but houses are cheaper to buy here than other capital cities. There are plenty of incentives at a federal and NT level. Isn't the tip here just buy a house?
It's just not realistic or strategic for many Territorians to buy. So it's just buy a house. It might be a slogan, but it's really not a housing strategy. And we need to fix the rental system that we've actually got. And you've got rising living costs, you've got stagnant wages, and that makes home ownership unattainable for a lot of people. So let's consider the service industry that Darwin really thrives off. We've got our markets, we've got our shopping centre. Not everyone who works in the service system is simply going to be able to afford to buy. To buy a house in Darwin, it might be affordable, but you still need an average income of about $124,000 a year, and that's really high. So we also need to consider that renting, it's not a stepping stone for everyone. As I said, I'm renting here in Darwin. Darwin's got a transient population. There's people who come here for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. They're here to work. They're here to live for a shorter time than the longer termers. And buying it's not going to make sense for everyone. So even if everyone wanted to buy, or they could buy, you still need a well-functioning rental market for those essential workers, people wanting to move to the Territory. That's really important that we modernise our rental market and our protections here for renters and landlords alike.
And you're hearing feedback from people saying it's too hard to rent here, I'm going to go somewhere else.
Absolutely. That's feedback that we have heard from renters through our surveys, which we have on our website, and it's certainly, anecdotal that we hear from the sector. And I think that it's really important also to note that we have a homelessness system here that is overstretched. We've got huge rates of homelessness in the Northern Territory, and you and I have spoken about that before. And we want to be able to keep people housed. We don't want to see people who just simply have to go on a social housing wait list because they can't access affordable or accessible rental properties here in Darwin or other urban centres, and so therefore they end up on social housing wait lists that are 10 plus years in our urban centres, or worse, they end up in a homelessness system which is already catering to so many Territorians. So we really need to make renting safe and stable for the almost 50% of our population who are accessing it.
And the nurses, the childcare educators, the hospitality employees, they're not on a budget where they're saving for a house deposit. They're looking to pay the rent.
Exactly. And as I said, it might be affordable here compared to the other capital cities to buy a house, but you still need an average income of about $124,000. So that's quite high. That's not everyone who's on that income. We do have a huge amount of poverty in the Northern Territory, and then we have, a small portion of the population who are on those really high incomes, but there's a lot of people in between.
Annie Taylor, CEO of NT Shelter, thanks for talking to us this morning.
Thanks for making the time.
And I've been asking